and which always means it's time for a joke. This is a joke you probably heard, but it's very apropos for tonight's class, and that is the joke goes like this. Jew passes away after a very long, difficult life, as many Jews unfortunately experience, and he gets to heaven and comes to God's throne, and he's told, you can ask whatever it is that you want. So he looks up, and he's obviously God doesn't sit in the chair, but whatever, for depiction of the joke. So he says, God, is it true that we're the chosen people? And God says, yes, you are the chosen people. And he looks up and says, God, maybe you could choose somebody else next time. So that's the joke. And so what's the idea of the joke is that we are a chosen nation, but unfortunately with that comes the fact that we've suffered a lot throughout our history. Social ostracization, economic disenfranchisement, expulsion. I think we've been expelled from every country in Europe at some point or another. Coerced conversions, pogroms, extermination camps, of course. And many people marvel at the Jewish people and say the fact that the Jewish people are around is a sign in itself that there is a God. And people like to look at the history of the Jews and why are the Jews still around. And there's various explanations that are given. And one of it is a simple idea, which we've discussed in our last course of Mashiach, is just the simple fact that as Jews, we have a belief in a better day. It's very hard to suffer all that suffering and not to have a belief that a better day will come. And so, also, as we discussed in the JLI course, Judaism's Gifts to the World, one of the things that we have given the world also is a sense of hope. This idea, good evening, Shelley. This idea that we believe that there is a better day coming. And we showed how that was a uniquely Jewish belief. And today's class is not going to be focused so much on that hope, but a little bit more than that, some actual facts. So let me first set the stage a bit here. The first thing we have to understand is, where is the source of this? Where is the source of this idea that we have a belief in a great future? So obviously it's sourced in the books of the prophets particularly, and we discussed more of those sources in the previous Mashiach class. If you want to go to that, I will just bring you here one source. This is a source from Maimonides. Maimonides wrote down 13 principles of faith. Now, a lot of people think that the 13 principles of faith are the 13 principles that we see that you see printed maybe on the mugs that they do for bat mitzvahs, or in the books they have the one-liners. But actually, the original of the 13 principles of faith are very, very long. They appear in Maimonides' book as a introduction to a certain chapter in the Talmud. There's a certain chapter in the Talmud called Chelek, and it has a lot of interesting details in it. Anyway, so Maimonides wrote an introduction to that chapter of the Talmud, and in there he wrote 13 principles of faith. It's been written in a concise form called the 13 Principles of Faith. A lot of bat mitzvah girls say it. It's also written in a poetic song known as Yigdal. Yigdal is a poetic song which a lot of Sephardic communities sing, a really beautiful song. And even though in Chabad we don't necessarily say the 13 Principles of Faith or Yigdal after prayers, like some other communities, nevertheless, these teachings and the 13 Principles of Faith are quoted throughout Chabad literature. So all Jewish people from all walks of life are very much into 13 Principles of Faith. So hopefully you have now a better idea of the 13 Principles of Faith. Maimonides basically took principles, and as we discussed last time, a principle is something that it's a foundational part of, it's not cosmetic, it's something that's a foundation of Judaism. So let's take a look. This is number 13. He says, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach. Although he may tarry, I await his coming every single day. Okay, so that is Maimonides, just a simple line of that. It's a foundational faith in Judaism, which again we discussed a little more at length what means a foundation. So now, what are we actually going to discuss now that we know that Mashiach was a foundation? And again, I'm not going to go over all the sources that Mashiach was a foundational part of the faith. That was in a previous class. If you want that, let me know after the class. But I want to go over a little bit about what we're going to discuss in the next 6 weeks so you have a better idea. Today's discussion is going to be about how realistic is this idea of Mashiach from purely a physical standpoint. In other words, there are physical promises about the Mashiach. Seemingly the world is not a great place. Is this a fantastical tale? That's lesson number 1 today. Lesson number 2 is related to class we gave in the previous course, and that is, why is Judaism so enamored with the concept of redemption? If you came to that course, there will be a lot of concepts we'll be going over. All I can say is, if you don't want to come, that's okay. If you want to come, though, I personally forgot what I taught, so it's okay to teach it again. And of course, hopefully we'll see it in a new light. But I at least I remember that I taught it. Lesson number 3 is not something we taught earlier, and that is how do we bring about, lesson number 3 is something we taught. How do we bring about the Mashiach? What steps do we have to take? We spoke a little bit about mitzvahs. We will expand upon ideas we spoke in the last course. Lesson number 4 is a really interesting one we didn't discuss last time. It's about seeing the progress that we have made throughout history towards the redemption, starting from Adam and Eve all the way till today. What progress, according to Kabbalah, has the world made towards the redemption? Very interesting class. That's number 4. Number 5 is, how will the redemption actually play out? Similar, we did discuss it all, in one of the classes on Elijah, a little bit about that. And class number 6, something we did not discuss, is what will the Messianic era actually look like? What events will happen then? In other words, not just the coming of the Mashiach, but once Mashiach comes, what does the world look like? So those are the 6 classes that we're going to have in front of us. And so again, we're going to start with today. And let's take a look at I want to do this one. Second. Okay. All right. I had a poll I wanted to do, but I think I'll hold off on that till a moment. So let's take a look at Mashiach. By the way, just one thing. As a rabbi for many years, we haven't taught Mashiach a lot. Mashiach is a concept. We say we want Mashiach now, but typically we like to sell the good things, the easy things, the nice things. Mashiach is kind of a difficult thing to sell people, and they say, rabbis are kind of like salesmen. It's the opposite. A salesman sells you something you want but you don't need, and a rabbi sells you something you need but you don't necessarily want. So I kind of feel it's kind of the same thing about Mashiach. Although we say we want the Mashiach, and there's an element of us that wants the Mashiach because it definitely sounds better, there's also a certain part of us that doesn't really feel the want and desire for it, and we'd rather get to other more exciting topics. So hopefully I've changed your mind in the previous classes on Mashiach, and hopefully this class will also add into that idea and make greater your appetite for the Mashiach, to the point where our desire for the Mashiach is an appetite that won't be satiated until he will come. Okay. So over this course about the Mashiach, good evening, Wendy. Over this course about the Mashiach, we will be discussing the Mashiach, the coming of the Messiah, both from a physical perspective and a spiritual perspective. In other words, when the Mashiach comes, there's going to be a change in the physical world. There's going to be physical changes, and there's going to be spiritual changes. The spiritual changes we're not going to talk about today. Today we're going to first discuss all of the physical changes. And so let's take a look at what the prophets promise us. So there's a lot of things people say about what happens when the Mashiach comes. But let's see what it actually says in the books of the prophets. So first I'm going to quote for you Maimonides, which he sums up mostly everything, and then we'll look at the prophets, which really build it out. So Maimonides puts in short, he says, in that era, the era of the Mashiach, the Messiah, there will be no famine or war, no envy or competition, for goodness will be in abundance, and all delights will be as commonplace as the dust. So sounds like a pretty nice time. Anything you want will be there. We'll have lots of goodness and lots of delights. So let's see what the actual prophets say. This is probably one of the most famous depictions of what the prophets tell us, the wolf lying with the lamb. So let's take a look. Here is first from Zechariah. For those who don't know, Zechariah was a prophet, as you can see, who lived in the 4th century. And he was speaking to the exiles that returned to the land of Israel. And he was trying to get them to improve their religious observance and also telling them about the future redemption. So he said, when the Mashiach will come, on that day, there will no longer be an impoverished person in the house of God. So he doesn't mean only if you're in the Beit HaMikdash, there won't be any impoverished person. The whole world being the house of God, there will be no more impoverished people. So poverty will be something that will not exist. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, today poverty is a big discussion to the point where there's, again, not getting to whether you agree or disagree with it, but there's become this discussion of a basic income. But that means, whether you agree with that or don't, everybody knows that there is poverty in the world. And so to imagine a world with no poverty is something quite fantastical. Let's take a look at another one for the Mashiach. God will give Isaiah. Everybody heard of Isaiah, of course. He lived in the 6th, 7th century, so 2 generations later. God will give rain for your seed with which you shall sow the soil. He will give you plentiful bread, the yield of land, and the land will be rich and abundant. So that is a era of plentiful food. So we know there are starving people every single day, not just in Africa, but in other places. And so we have, when the Mashiach comes, no poor. And by the way, even if you have money, doesn't mean you have food, right? It's something that's happened many times throughout history. You could have money and not the food. So what this is saying, not only will there be money, there will be food. And here we get even more fantastical. Let's put it that way. Of course, it's not fantastical. It's a prophecy. Disabilities will vanish. It says in the prophet Isaiah, at that time, the eyes of the blind will be opened. The ears of the deaf will be unstopped. At that time, the lame shall skip like a deer, and the tongue of the mute shall sing. So that means that pretty much all disabilities will vanish. And from there, we can also extrapolate that pretty much any illness will disappear. Any illness, somebody with an illness, all illnesses will disappear. So we have no poverty, plenty of anything that you need. Amazon Prime, same day delivery for everything that you need without having to pay, and then on top of that, we have disabilities. No more disabilities, everything gone. All right, what else does it say about the Mashiach? Isaiah continues. Nation shall not lift sword against nation, and nor shall anyone train for war anymore. So not only will they not fight, they won't even train for war because there will just be an era of peace. Now Isaiah takes it a step further. Nations shall beat their swords into plow blades and their spears into pruning tools. So not only will they not train for war, not only there won't be war, not only they won't train for war, even the tools that they had for war, they'll be so confident that they'll turn them into uses that can be used for a day-to-day basis. Okay? And on top of this, no longer, Isaiah says, no longer will violence be heard in your land, nor robbery or devastation within your borders. So, there won't be any more types of fighting, any types of violence, any type of crime. All of that will go away. So Judaism pretty much believes that all of the ills of society is something that's going to disappear. And it's going to disappear like that when the Mashiach comes. That's what it seems to be saying. They tell the story. They tell the story of a farmer. There was a simple farmer, and one day he came up. He put up a sign, and he said, "Medical treatment." And if I treat you successfully, it's $500. If I can't cure you, I pay you $1,000. So there's a doctor in the town. He says, "Who's this hotshot farmer? Who does he think he is?" So he walks over to the farmer, and he comes to Mr. Dr. Farmer. I'd like to be cured of my sense of taste. I can't taste anything. So the farmer tells his assistant, go to drawer number 22, row number 3, bring him a couple drops and put it in his mouth. So they bring it, they put a couple drops in the mouth. He spits it. He says, "Oh, this is gasoline." They say, "Oh." So the farmer looks at him, "You see, doctor, I healed your sense of taste." So now the doctor's fuming. He wants to get back his money. So he comes back the next week and he says, Doctor, I think I've lost my memory. Can you heal me?" And so the doctor says, "Sure, no problem. Assistant, please go to box 22, row number 3, and bring me a couple drops." He says, "Those are the same drops you gave me last time." He says, "Oh, I healed your memory." Okay, there it goes. So now, having lost $1,000, now he's really upset. So he heads off to the farmer and he thinks of one final point. He comes to the farmer and he says, "Mr. Farmer, I've lost my eyesight." The farmer looks at him and says, "You stumped me. I cannot heal that. Here's $1,000. The doctor looks down and says, "What do you mean? This is only 500." He says, "I healed you." Okay. So it's a fantastical story, of course, but that's what it's going to be. When Mashiach comes, we're all going to be healed from all these different ailments, whether it's seeing, whether it's crime, hostilities, all these different things will disappear. And if this sounds a little bit unbelievable to you, that's okay. I want to mention that before this course, I got a lot of people telling me, because I put out a lot of things about belief, and there's, can there be a belief in a positive world? So I want to throw this poll up here on the board, and I want to see how you feel about this. A lot of people have a negative view of where the world is today. A lot of people feel like the world is heading in a wrong direction, whether they feel it's a toxic society or morals are falling to the wayside. And we just look in the news. There's tons of terrible things that are going on. And so the question is, how do you feel about it? I'm curious. I put up a poll over here. It's anonymous voting. So the first question is, how would you rate the world generally today versus 30 years ago, the 90s? Is it greatly improved, somewhat improved, the same, somewhat deteriorated? The world on a whole. And then how do you feel about the future? Taking miracles, I spelled that wrong, taking miracles out of the equation. And then finally, how much of your future outlook is based on current politics and news? So it's an interesting post. So if anybody can vote over here, I'd love to hear your opinions. See what you think just in the last 30 years, where you think the world has gone and where do you think the world is going? And I think I hear a baby in the background. That might be mine. Does it say I didn't see in the prophecies, when the Mashiach comes, babies won't cry anymore. I was hoping for that one. That would have been nice. All right, we're getting in some more votes. If anybody else is still in here could vote, that would be nice. So it's interesting. We got versus 30 years ago. We're getting different votes, either improved or deteriorated. Okay. Seems like more people have an optimistic view for the future. And how much of today's future is based on politics and the news? Very much, somewhat, not at all.
Can you show the poll, Rabbi? Can you actually show it?
Oh, you can't see the results?
No, I think you have to close it and then show it.
Well, I can also share the screen. Tell me if you see it. It tells me that we still need 3 more responses, but we'll do it. Can you see it now?
No, I just see elimination of crime.
Okay, let me try one more time.
It's a nice thing, but it's not the poll.
It's not the poll. Well, I don't know that you can see it until it's completed, but it's.
No, you can stop it. You can actually stop the poll.
Okay, we're going to end polling now.
It doesn't matter. You can stop it.
Okay, let's end the poll and we'll see. Share the results. Okay, can you see the results now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Now you can see how people feel about it. So 4 people think we've somewhat improved. 2 people think we've deteriorated. A couple of people didn't answer, of course. It seems generally the trend, people feel very optimistic. And I guess most people do base their feeling of the world based on politics and news. Okay, so we'll take it as it is. And I will close that for now. All right.
We stopped.
Interesting.
We stopped watching the news. That's why we put it out at all.
That's why it's not based on the news. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see if that's the right way to go or not as we get to the end of the class. So I think a lot of people have a negative view of the world, or somewhat of a negative view on the world, based on what is shared in the news or based on what's shared in the politics. However, if we dig deep down into the numbers, we will see that the world is actually improving. And not only that, the world is improving specifically in the areas in which the prophets have spoken about. So in other words, to get to the era of Mashiach is not something that's fantastical and it's like would be a total change of where we are today. But actually, if we look deep into what's going on, we are actually very much on our way getting there. And that's one thing I want to share. Number two is, I think a lot of us do realize that we do live in a better world to an extent today. Obviously, we have better health and whatnot. But what I was surprised when I studied this class is just how much better the world is. And I had no idea just how much better it is. So we know generally, we live in a better world, but just how much better it is, it'll really blow your mind, and really to realize that we really are marching forward towards the Mashiach. All right. So that being said, there's a lot of people who don't believe. There's a lot of people who really think we're very far from the, very far from the Mashiach, and those will typically be in the news. That's usually what gets into the news, right? If it leads, it bleeds. So let's take a look here for a op-ed that was written in a newspaper, the Boston Globe, 1997. We seem to be in an era of rapid change, increasing instability, insecurity, and danger, which, by the way, this is written 97. We know it's not true, but people write the same things today. The reason why we're bringing an old op-ed is just to show you what happened of it. The Indian life was a difficult one. The winters were harsh and people died, but there was no employment problems. Community harmony was strong, substance abuse unknown, crime nearly non-existent. What warfare there was between tribes was largely ritualistic and seldom resulted in indiscriminate or wholesale slaughter. While there were hard times, life was for the most part stable and predictable. The seasons passed in their turn. With them came, with few exceptions, means of providing food, warmth, and shelter. Now, what's interesting is that although here in this class, I think maybe because we hang around the synagogue a lot, most of us have a more positive view. Surveys show time and again that most people actually have a negative view of the world. Let's take a look at these. Which, by the way, everybody here, I would assume everybody here thinks 2020 was a horrible year, right? There's even a website dedicated to is 2020 over yet? But actually, there's a lengthy article, which maybe I'll share at the end, which actually goes on to show that actually 2020 was the 4th best year in human history. So interesting, but this, we focus though on a couple things, and with that, we like to say how it's really bad. So let's take a look over here. Here's a survey. And the question that was asked, this is in 2017, was asked, in the last 20 years, has the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty decreased, increased, or remained the same? 52% of respondents believed that there's increased poverty in the world. 28% didn't know, 20% believed it decreased. So that means a whopping majority of people truly believe that poverty is getting worse. Extreme poverty, I should say. Extreme poverty is getting worse. That is what most people believe. Let's take a look at our perception of crime rates. Let's see. Is there more crime in the US than there was a year ago or less? So as you can see, this survey is done over year after year after year. And aside from a couple years like 2001, don't know why, most people believe that the crime is getting worse and worse and worse. Year after year after year after year, most people believe that crime is getting worse. So again, people have a very negative outlook on things. They tell the story of, the story of Marvin. He's sitting in his house and suddenly he clutches the left side of his body and he says, "Oh, my appendix, it feels like it's busting." And his wife says, "Don't you know the appendix is on the other side?" And he says, "Oh my gosh, my appendix is on the wrong side. I better head to the doctor." So many of us have a way of translating everything into negative. And of course, the news is great at that. But also we as human beings are good at that, of translating things in a negative frame. If you call someone, they don't answer after a day or two, we automatically have a translation. Oh, they're angry at me. They're upset at me. we always have these things. They actually say it has to do with the human psyche. We have so much information that's thrown at us, and the human mind is meant to operate to help us survive. And so it's always looking for dangers. And sometimes there's not danger. I guess it creates the danger. But anyway, that's why I guess they say if it bleeds, it leads. So again, most people believe that poverty is getting worse. Most people believe crime is getting worse. How about expectations for the future? a poll in 2015. All things considered, do you think the world is getting better, worse, or neither getting better nor worse? 58% believe it's getting worse, 30% believe it's getting nor better nor worse, and 11% believe it's getting better. So again, over all these different ideas, most people believe that things are getting worse. You know, how people always say the good old days, people really believe that. I mean, you know, some people say, you know, they don't make corned beef like they used to. They don't like tomatoes like they used to. But a lot of people have that feeling about the world in general. And this feeling has definitely been exacerbated by, you know, by COVID. You know, they tell the story of you know, a grandpa was once sitting. He says, you know, in the good old days when I was a kid, I could go down to the dollars. I could go down to the store with $1, and with just $1, I'd come back with 2 pounds of potatoes, a loaf of bread, 2 pints of milk, a pound of cheese, a couple steaks, and a pack of tea. Unfortunately, today they have too many security cameras. Okay, all right. So you know, people have this idea of the good old days, and today we have more of a negative outlook. And again, COVID has definitely added to that, and a lot of people have a lot of anxiety, stress, hopelessness. And the truth is that if we have, there's a high cost to believing that the world is bad. In other words, what I'm trying to show here is that most people do believe the world is in a negative track. And there's a high cost to that. And the cost is really in two. First of all, it increases your anxiety, increases mental issues. But second of all, if you believe the world is steadily getting much worse, you're less likely to do something about it. Okay, those who believe extreme poverty is getting worse day after day after day, then why are you going to go work to fix it? You know, you're not going to put a dent in it, right? Whereas if you have the belief that things are getting better, you're more likely to do something about it. And so that's why it's important. And again, putting Mashiach aside, it's important to set the record straight. Where is the world heading? Most people have this negative view of the world. And what my belief is actually that if the news would, you know, the news say if it bleeds, it leads, it's true, but they're also perpetuating the problem. If they keep making good stories, yeah, in the beginning, they'll probably lose business. But eventually, if they all do it, those are the things people are going to want to see because they're going to want to see themselves in a reflection in the news, because those are the types of things that people are going to be doing. And so there's a high cost to this belief. And I think it kind of perpetuates itself. And when we have that type of belief, we are less likely to do something. So now we're going to examine the data. And again, my point today is not just to demonstrate to you that the world is better than it was many years ago. A little more than that. It's to show you how the world is better than it was even 30 years ago, specifically in the prophecies that were given to the prophets about the Mashiach, to show you we are on that path. And second of all, to show you not only is it better, it's exponentially better. Something you may not have realized. It's exponentially better today than it was even 30 years ago, 20 years ago, which was a surprise to me. I thought, okay, the world is better today than it was in the 40s, obviously the 50s, but it's even better than the 90s and, you know, the 2000s. So, and from a Jewish perspective, we believe that the world is a better place because the Mashiach is coming. So let's take a look over here. An interesting thing the Rabbi said. Why will the world be becoming a better place because the Mashiach is coming? Most people, by the way, associate Mashiach coming with a negative, right? There's going to be an Armageddon. There's going to be a big war. That's how Mashiach is going to come. And not so fast. The coming of Mashiach does not have to be heralded by a terrible, terrible bloodbath. Okay? Let's take a look over here. All the experiences of the future redemption begin even before the Mashiach's arrival. Just as Jewish law encourages us to sample the Shabbat foods in the hours before the onset of Shabbat. So there's a law, right? Friday night we have wonderful Shabbat dinners. It says before Shabbat, you should try and taste some of the foods of Shabbat. I always taste the dessert. Okay. All right. So similarly, in the 6th millennium, even before the onset of the redemption, we can already sample the experiences that will fully materialize in the future. So we know in Jewish tradition, we're right on the year 5,781. In the next millennia will be what's called the 7th day, right? There's first 1,000 years. So we're already in the 6,000th millennia, yeah, if I pronounced that correctly, which corresponds to the 6th day of creation. And then the 7th is like Shabbat. It says the coming of Mashiach is like a day that's all Shabbat. So obviously by the year 6,000, Mashiach is going to be here, which means that already now it's like Friday afternoon, just like in the micro, Friday afternoon, you have to taste Shabbat food. So now in the macro, we're kind of already Erev Shabbat. We're on the eve of Mashiach, the cusp of Mashiach. Mashiach has to definitely come by the year 6000, hopefully before. We're going to have a foretaste of Mashiach. So in addition to receiving a foretaste of the spiritual delights we will experience then, the instruction to taste from Shabbat foods means quite simply to taste the fish. The same is true of the era preceding the redemption. We will then have physical blessings in abundance, and we will be able to serve God out of material prosperity. Now, the Rebbe wrote this in the year the Rebbe said this in the year 1965. And if it was true then, he was definitely correct about it, as we can see now. I do want to point out, although we will be pointing out how in general the world is becoming a more positive place, it does, yes, there are prophecies and things written in the Talmud that there will be some negative occurrences before the Mashiach comes. For example, the Talmud Sota has a very interesting section where it says negative things that will happen before Mashiach comes. For example, it says there will be a lot more chutzpah. I think we can see that happening in the world. It says the cost of living will increase. Happening too. The superpower will turn to heresy. I'm not going to mix into politics, okay? Children will rebel against their parents. That's definitely happening. It says the leaders of the generation will be kind of be led by the people. It's another thing that's happening, and so these are negatives. But the Rebbe also pointed out, although it's a negative, there's also a positive to it. So, for example, children rebelling against their parents sometimes ends up to be a good thing. Having chutzpah is sometimes used in a good manner. In the 60s, a lot of people bucked the system. That's when the Baal Tshuva movement started. It was in the 60s and 70s when a lot of people, turned against their parents, but in a good way. And, it still happens. And the other idea is that although in general the trajectory of the world is good, there will always before the great light, there's going to be a little bit of, there's going to be darkness. And so there will be a darkness before the coming of the Mashiach. Either way, let us get to focusing on the great, what is going on in the world today and what's happening in the world. So here it is. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Very interesting stuff. Any questions before I continue?
Can we bring in Shabbat early?
Can you bring? Oh, very good example. Yes. So just as you can bring in Shabbat early, the Mashiach can come already. Yes. Good example. So that is what it says in the prophets. Be'ita, in its time, achishana, I will bring it early. And so that's what we pray for, that in the time of the Mashiach will come early. So although Mashiach has to come by the year 6000, we hope that he will come earlier.
Okay. So Rabbi, the issue about the extreme poverty, is that the problem is, as generations grow, we keep redefining what extreme poverty is. So because we're always trying to improve ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's why I think people get the opinion that things are getting worse, because we're constantly saying what we think extreme poverty is. I mean, if you have two televisions, that may be extreme poverty now.
Yeah. It's a good.
It used to be you didn't have a television.
Yeah. So it's a good question, and the answer to that would actually be, and it's good you brought that up, is today we're going to define extreme poverty by the World Bank. The World Bank is an organization that their stated goal is to get rid of extreme poverty ultimately. And their definition of extreme poverty is anybody earning less than $1.90 a day. And actually, they just upped that. It used to be earning, I think 5 years ago, it was $1.25 a day. They upped it a couple of years ago to $1.90 a day. And even with the updated amount, here is the figure of what's happening with extreme poverty. So actually, they haven't really redefined it. This is what's been going on since 1985. What percentage of people that are living in extreme poverty has been going down from exponentially since the 90s. So from 1990s to 2015, we've been getting rid of extreme poverty pretty quick. So just to give you the numbers, you see the graph here, but just to give you the numbers, The global population suffering from extreme poverty went from nearly 90% in 1820. So in 1820, the average person suffered from extreme poverty. Now, I don't know what statistics they held in, but that's what they say, to around 10% in 2015. We right now have only 10% of the world population in extreme poverty. And that's including the much larger population that we have today. Only 10% of that giant population is living in extreme poverty. So since 1990, the number of people living above extreme poverty has nearly doubled. To give you the actual numbers, in 1990, there were 1.9 billion people living in extreme poverty. Okay. This number was reduced to 735 million in 2015. So from 1.9 billion people in extreme poverty, it's down to 735 million in 2015. Now, those numbers are staggering. What does that actually mean? If you average it out per day, that means in the average day, every day over the past 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, well, not 20 years, 25 years, 128,000 fewer people were living in extreme poverty. On every single day, we're getting, on average, 128,000 less people living in extreme poverty. So again, not poverty, which we'll get to poverty in a moment, which is what you're referencing about 2TV's extreme poverty. And in the 7 years from 2000 to 2015, we could have had a headline every single day, 128,000 less people in extreme poverty, right? That's what we could have been doing. We could have been doing that. Let me give you some other things that are related to that. Child labor is very much related to extreme poverty. So child labor has decreased from the year 2000 to the year 2016 by 40%. 40%. That's a staggering number. So let's put this up here on the screen. So again, this is from the World Bank. This is from the Daily Upbeat headline. This is from the New York Times 2019. It was a feature they used to run. I don't know. They have only one headline that's Daily Upbeat, I guess. Everything else in the news is not. But anyways, if you're depressed by the state of the world, let me toss out an idea. In the long arc of human history, 2019 has been the best year ever. As recently as 1981, 42% of the planet's population endured extreme poverty, defined by the United Nations as living on less than about $2 a day. That proportion has plunged to less than 10% of the world's population now. Every day for a decade, newspapers could have carried the headline, another 170,000 moved out of extreme poverty yesterday. Or if one uses a higher threshold, the headline could have been the number of people living on more than $10 a day increased to 245,000 yesterday. So whichever way you look at it, it's a staggering idea. Anybody here blown away by the numbers? Just the sheer amount of change that we've accomplished over such a short period of time. I mean, I wouldn't have guessed. I would have thought incrementally, 10,000 people a day at most, you save. And would you ever see this in a headline in a newspaper? No. But this is where we're at. Here's a memo of the New York Times. The huge drop of number of people living on less than 1.90 per day is among the most underappreciated and most important developments of our generation. And so again, this is just something that just reminiscent of what Zechariah was saying. Poverty will be something of the past. We are speeding towards that at the speed of light. Now, obviously, we still live in a world which is the exile. Are we going to have the full on, feeling of that? Not necessarily, but we're definitely getting closer, as you can see with this idea. And the news is never going to put it on. The news is always the most contradictory, right? You turn on the news, what do they first tell you? Good evening. Then they tell you why it's a bad evening. So they should say good evening. And today, 192,000 people left extreme poverty, right? Now, anybody here ever heard of the shrinking middle class? Yeah? Anybody believes the middle class is shrinking? Yeah? That's a headline that's been going on for a while, right? Probably you feel it's shrinking. Well, here's the actual numbers. So it is true in 1971, 61% of Americans lived in the middle class. It slowly declined, culminating in about 50% of Americans in the middle class by 2015. However, that's about where it stayed. In 2016, it showed 52% of people were in the middle class. 2018, still at 52%. So the middle class has not been shrinking over the past 2 years. On top of that, when you look at, so it shrunk by about 11%, right? From 62 to about 50. So from that 11%, only 4% became poorer. The other 7% actually became wealthier. That's how they exited the middle class. And so although they talk about the shrinking middle class, will you ever hear a headline, the middle class stopped shrinking? Or will you ever hear a headline of the middle class that shrunk? 7% went up, 4% went down, you know? And so we have all these things that are in our mind that play into our negative feeling and negative outlook on the world. But in truth, there's a lot more positive that's going on. On top of that, the money you have today is worth a lot more than it was back in the day. Okay, think about it. The money you have today, now you say, well, there's inflation, okay? But typically, people used to spend 17% of their money on food, okay? That has dropped now to 9%. And today, for less money, you can get more, okay? I know you can't buy the dozen eggs, but what I mean is even poor people, like you said, poor people can buy 2 televisions, can get a phone. Our buying power is that much more powerful, maybe because we make such cheap products. And maybe because people are buying junk food. I don't know, which is probably true. People can buy junk food. But at the end of the day, people have a lot more that they can get. Think about it. Think about what you can get today versus what your grandparents were able to buy, okay? Even assuming they were wealthier. Well, your buying power in a way is much better. You know, poor people go on vacation. Poor people have TVs. You know, we have, you know, everybody can get a phone. We have a lot more buying power today than we did in years past. If, you know, in years past, if you were surviving meant literally you had just enough bread and to pay the rent, and that was it. You know, that was your life. That was the difficult life. Today, poor people have a lot more. So all these are just contributing on top of what I've said earlier. The real main point is just how fast we are at eliminating poverty within this world. Then there's another interesting thing, which is called famine to abundance, right? So the prophet not only promised the lack of, he not only promised there won't be poverty, but there will be plenty of food. And as I said earlier, there's a possibility that you have money, but you don't have food. And for a while, that was a real worry. And I'm going to show you here a video. It's going to show you why that was a real worry. You might say, what's the worry? So let me show you here. Let's move ahead. Famine, abundance, okay, present.
Overpopulation, so long predicted, has stolen upon us. It's getting worse week by week.
In the 1960s, a new kind of fear began to spread across America.
The U.S. could be busting out at the seams by the end of the century.
If we do not, by humane means, limit our numbers, then numbers are going to be limited by more famines and shortages and consequent social conflicts.
The idea that human population was outstripping the Earth's ability to support mankind was a powerful one.
Population growth will kill you stone cold dead.
The message reached a wider audience than ever before. But what became of the population bomb?
The population bomb was defused by urbanization, by people getting out of poverty all over the world, by having enough to eat. What if large population is not bad, but is good?
What many more countries are already trying to come to terms with is aging of the population.
Japan needs more women to have children. The fertility rate's low. The population is getting older and shrinking.
America's in the midst of a baby bust.
While certain population hotspots remain a concern, largely in areas with the scarcest resources, much of the world is now grappling with the flip side of the population bomb.
you know, sometimes when I when I see these doomsday predictions, I wish I could just like pull on them, you know, the old doomsday predictions from like, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and see what happened to it. So the big doomsday prediction in the 60s was, we're gonna have too many people. How can we support them? You know, we can barely support people now. There's so much hunger and poverty in the world. What are we gonna do? And what's happened of it, as it shows, now it's the flip side. Developed countries are worried they're not gonna have enough people. Why? Because if you have all these old people and no young people, who's going to run the country? And it's an interesting thing. And, you know, so what actually happened with the fear? So obviously refrigeration and then the ways of getting food to people helped. But, you know, you might think at some point we're going to run out of space. I mean, if we keep building taller and taller buildings, how are we going to make enough food for everybody? Where are you going to do it? And so this is another amazing thing, is the fact that we have technology and science behind the food that allows us to do with the smaller amount of property a lot more than what they were able to do in years past. So on top of the average farm able to produce a lot more food, here, I don't know, has anybody seen these farms in New Jersey? Yeah, they've got these big farms in New Jersey now, but they're in a warehouse. A farm and a warehouse. So like, here's an example. I'll just play it for, you know, a minute.
Morning. Well, this is what vertical farming looks like. Arugula, kale, watercress, all growing indoors on shelves stacked 7 levels high. When it's all said and done, Arrow Farm says it can produce 1.7 million pounds of greens every year. This is to scale.
This is what we mean by scale.
This 70,000 square foot facility housed in a former Newark steel plant.
This is 36 feet high.
Is CEO David Rosenberg's green machine. It produces 130 times more produce than the average field farm of the same size in America per year.
130 times the size. On top of that, the big benefit of it is it can be near the urban areas. So all this big deal, you have to go, you know, bring it from Kansas back to the big cities. You know, this takes care of it, and they've become better and better at it. And the food is tasting better, and it uses a lot less water. You know, it uses a lot less water, nutrients, and impact. So 130% better. I mean, can you imagine you build this facility in a place which has hunger? You know how much hunger you're going to get rid of in a moment. And so this worry that people have, there's not going to be enough food. Look, God is always making sure we're taken care of. You know, people, this is the problem. People try to play God, and we're all worried, and how are we going to survive? And God is always a couple steps ahead of us. And so God, you know, foresaw the boom of people, and he made sure that the technological advances would be there so that we would have enough food. And so this harkens to what Isaiah was saying. You can have enough, you can have as many people as you want, and there's going to be plenty of food. And indoor farming, by the way, is a booming business. In 2016, the business of indoor farming was valued at 23 billion. Today, it's reaching 40 billion. And so this is really the next wave. If anybody wants to invest, I've got a couple stocks. No, I'm kidding. Okay. How about drinking water? Drinking water was another big fear of people. I'm sure most of you have seen the you know, famous Israeli plants which can pull water out of air. They have these machines that can pull water out of air, and some Israeli company made that. But you'd be surprised to see how many people have been able to gain access to clean water. In 2018, each day, on average, saw about 305,000 people gain access to clean drinking water for the first time. Again, my point here is to show you the staggering numbers, just how fast this world is progressing. 305,000 people a day, not a year, a day. 305,000 new people gaining access to clean water. Now you may ask, well, that's nice for all the people who never had water. What about me living in America? Well, you can go to your grocery store every single day. Your grocery store is growing with more and more options and things for you to buy. So we're definitely exponentially growing, not just for those who are very impoverished, but even of those of us that are living in the wealthy places. So what have we shown? In poverty, exponentially, the world is getting rid of poverty. And even the bad headlines are nowhere near as bad as they seem. The shrinking middle class is not what they make it to seem like. again, this is not to say there's no bad news out there, but it's not only it's nothing what like they say it is, but just the opposite. It's crazy in just how good the world is becoming. Same thing applies to food. Now let's take a look at lifespan. This is the one that's probably most obvious to people, but let's take a look over here. So here's the life expectancy of the average person. Since the 1800s, life expectancy has been going up. Now, you could obviously attribute it simply to saying, well, there's no infant mortality, right? So you say, well, if infants are dying, of course, the average lifespan is 30 years. Obviously, now it's reaching 70, 80 years or even higher. But actually, even if you take out infant mortality, so it says that in the year 1841, an average 5-year-old, which infant mortality are children who pass away before they're 5. In the year 1841, a 5-year-old could be expected to live 55 years. Today, that has increased to 82 years. So that's an increase of 27 years. Not only that, Aaron mentioned to me, they mentioned it here, there's even people discussing about getting rid of aging altogether. Now, whether that's ever going to happen or not, it's interesting that we're even having such discussions. Not only that, there was an interesting breakthrough in the year 2020. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion. People are worried the vaccines are changing your DNA. Unrelated to that, there was actually discovery that they have figured out how to edit your DNA sequence. And they're hoping that that will be a way to get rid of a lot of issues and diseases that people have. And this was particularly a discovery. There was a big breakthrough in this in the year 2020. It's called CRISPR, an acronym for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. Now, I have no idea what that is. I'm not a doctor, but it has the potential application to correct genetic defects and treating and preventing a spread of diseases. Now, again, whether we'll actually see it ever play out in our lifetime or not, I don't know. But the fact that we are having such conversations, and that's how far we've come, that's just amazing. And exponentially, the world is getting greater. I mean, think of it. We had a new novel virus, and within a year, not only do we have vaccines, we have lots of medications that can treat it too. Within a very short period of time, the amount of treatments that are available for COVID is just astounding, and that's a testament to where we're at today. And I think they're expecting that the average life expectancy is going to reach 100 at some point soon. I mean, there's other ways that we're extending life in ways you don't even realize. For example, as we get closer to autonomous cars, car crashes kill a lot of people every year. If we have autonomous cars that are safer, people are going to live longer lives and things like that. We don't even realize the odd things that are increasing our lives. And again, the world is making strides in an exponential way. It's moving faster and faster. It's moving at a faster and faster pace. So far we've spoken about how exponentially the world is getting better in the area of poverty, in the area of food, and in the area, of course, of life expectancy. Now let's take a look at disabilities. Obviously, a lot of people, you're familiar with some of the basic things that we know, disabilities we've been able to get rid of, cochlear implants or things like that. But it's even better than we think. Let's take a look over here. Here's one about, I'm sure the eye doctor would know more about this. I don't know much about it, but there's this new thing. And somebody who couldn't see, blind for more than 2 decades, inherited an eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. She got a sophisticated microchip implanted in one of her eyes. It's called Argus 2. It's just one of a growing number of bold new approaches to treating blindness, offering hope to millions of mostly older Americans in danger of losing their sight from macular degeneration, glaucoma, diabetic. All right, I'm not going to pronounce these things. Okay, I'm going to give up. But you get the idea that our advances are not just in glasses and are not just Band-Aids anymore. We're having a lot more sophisticated things. And as Stephen Rose, chief researcher, says, it's not a question of if we'll end blindness. It's really a question of when. That's a powerful line. And again, These are things that are out there, and they make the news, but really not as often as all the other things that are out there. Muteness. There's a bunch of cool things out there for people who can't speak. Here's a couple of them. The first one is artificial. All right, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce it. Larynx. Someone pronounce it. Yeah, I said it right. Okay, larynx.
Larynx.
Larynx. Okay, as a singer, you know how to pronounce it, right? So they've been able to figure out how to grow the larynx in a laboratory, and they're hoping one day that they can make transplants of people who have bad ones to be able to talk. On top of that, they have a device that's capable of reading how your tongue touches your palate during speech. And so they're going to somehow make a digitized larynx too. And finally, they have one that there's a brain implant that allowed someone to talk. So there's all these different crazy things that are enabling people who had no ability to talk before to talk now. So they don't, it's not just they'll have to type, they can get an implant in their brain, and that will enable them to talk. So again, just amazing, amazing things. The deaf will hear. So we all know about hearing aids. We all know about cochlear implants. There's actually another one that actually there's a, if you have a bad ear like mine, they can actually, well, you could do a cochlear implant, but even someone that's worse, who doesn't have a nerve, there's total nerve damage, they figured out a way to get an implant, to stick something in the brain that the person can hear. It's actually, I had a video of it. Let me just show you, it's short. All right, well, here you see all the prophecies. The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the lame will walk, mute will speak. They're actually in prosthetics. They now have figured out how to connect prosthetics to your nerves. MIT has figured out how to connect prosthetics to your nerves. So actually with your brain, you can make the foot move, okay? They're no longer just static. They figured out how to make them move. And not only that move, you can also feel, okay? This is how far they've come. The prosthetics, not only can they figure out how to make them move, but they can make them feel. You can look it up. Really fascinating stuff. And again,
it's like the Bionic Man.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Again, these are all not the fixes that will be when Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be a lot better. Okay. It's going to be a real fix. The person's actually going to have a full leg. But this is called a taste. It's a taste of Mashiach. But it also makes that idea not that far-fetched. For example, it says in the old books, when Mashiach will come, the world will know in an instant. So for years and years, everybody said, oh, that's a belief that we have. But now we can understand what it means. The world will know in an instant. Mashiach's Twitter account, if he's not suspended, he will post a tweet and he will say, Mashiach's here. It's not a political joke, right? Okay. It's just an amazing way of looking at the world and where the world is heading. Again, so this is not to say this is what Mashiach will look like, but this is showing us. This is the video, I think, of the hearing. This is a little boy who was born without any hearing.
So many first moments to remember with children, their first step, their first word, but tonight a different kind of first, a little boy about to hear his dad's voice for the first time.
This is the moment so many people are talking about. Grayson Clamp, 3 years old, he had never heard his father before.
Talk to him, Daddy.
Daddy loves you. Daddy loves you.
Grayson points his finger there, hearing sound for the first time ever. An experimental procedure, complex brain surgery. So rare, he's the first child to have it in the U.S. Bypassing the ears altogether, surgeons inserted a tiny microchip directly onto the brain's sound processing center, right there in the brainstem, to stimulate hearing, skipping the ears and going straight for the brain.
All right, so obviously, there's a couple more videos they show, a couple other ones. All right, so I take it that some of these ideas, particularly in the field of health, were more things that you knew. So poverty, famine, those were things maybe you didn't realize just how far we've gotten. A medical field, you probably knew most of it, not all of it. But how about in the section of war? Obviously, we understand that war in general slowed down since World War II, maybe a little bit in Vietnam, but we still feel like there's a little too much war going on. But first of all, let's look at the bigger picture, of course, and that's the idea, is how much bad war has there actually been? Let's take a look over here. Death from war. So we had, of course, World War II, Vietnam, and all those wars, but it's been pretty steady at a very, very low rate. And so it's been pretty low. And when you think about it, all of the famous people in history were known for their war. You know, you have Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne, all these people, they were famous for the war. Today, we would be bringing them to the courts. You know, we bring them to the International Court of Law for starting wars for no reason. And armed conflict has really disappeared. I mean, when you ask a Jew, where are your grandparents from? Well, they're from this city, which used to be part of Hungary, but maybe sometimes was Czechoslovakia, and at some point was taken over by the USSR, and now it's part of Ukraine, whatever. I mean, it's like, that was the normal thing. But today, it doesn't happen. Land grabs rarely happen. And the last land grab we really know of is Russia annexing Crimea. And even then, it's a small area that most of the Crimeans, not saying he did the right thing, but most of the Crimeans were pro what he did. Again, I'm not saying he did the right thing, but it's just an interesting thing. Like, there's just so little of land grabs going on compared to what used to be going on. I know, of course, some people say Israel does land grabs, right? God forbid. No, Israel was defending themselves. That's a whole nother story. So I think a lot of people, though, don't think of it. Don't think of the bigger picture. A lot of people just feel that there's so much war going on because of what's shown in the news. But the war that used to exist really doesn't exist right now. And not only is war disappearing, but as the prophets say, not only will war disappear, but weapons themselves will disappear. Also, by the way, just another example. Right now, Iran and Israel have been fighting for so long. It's been a pretty cold war for a long time. Can you imagine, mostly attacking, through the cyberspace? I mean, that's, most of their attacks is cyber wars. That's where the wars are today, It's even better than it was in the original Cold Wars. The original Cold Wars where you had to build up your own military so you could show you're stronger than the other. Today, you don't have to go anywhere. You just have to have enough hackers, and that's good enough. So think about it at where we are. All right, how about weapons? We understand, of course, that people started off with spears, knives, arrows. Then we got to better killing machines until we got to nuclear warheads. And so in a sense, you could say, well, the prophecy that they'll turn their swords into plowshares, where is that? Where is that happening? So first of all, you have to know that the world is committed to getting rid of their nuclear capabilities. For example, let me share this over here. For example, most people don't know, but the US and Russia have a strategic agreement to get rid of nuclear warheads. Okay, so in 1991, the US and Russia entered into what's called START, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, to decommission their nuclear arsenal. Not only that, for all the fighting America and Russia does, a new treaty, they restarted START, okay, they rewrote a new treaty in 2010. And so here you can see the global, or I should say the US and Soviet stockpile of nuclear weapons. They are decommissioning their warheads. And so what that means is by 2016, 85% of the nuclear warheads from 1986 were decommissioned. In 2021, when the current New START treaty between Russia and US will be completed, the nuclear arsenal of the United States and Russia will be 6% of what they once were. Now that is a massive number. I mean, for those of you who were alive in the 80s, could you imagine such a day where Russia and America would decommission? Now it's true there was another treaty. There was a 1987 INF treaty, which the United States and Russia backed out of, but the START treaty is still in full effect. Anybody here knows what the INF treaty is? No? All right, if you don't, what you don't know doesn't hurt you, so I didn't say it.
Intercontinental or whatever, missiles, whatever. Okay. INF, yeah.
INF, yeah. Okay, good. All right, on top of that, here are a couple other things. We said turning their swords into plowshares. So that's just getting rid of things. But how about turning swords into plowshares? Today, a lot of armies are being used for peaceful purposes. Here's just one example. And it's from China, so I don't know if you can trust the news, but it's from China. It says they reassigned 60,000 soldiers to plant trees in a bid to fight pollution. So they're having 60,000 soldiers that are going to plant trees. They're going to make forest cover. They're going to plant 32,000 square feet of trees in a year. So they're commissioning the army to do that. Similarly, we know when a tsunami hit Indonesia, the United States used its military satellites to figure out a safe way to save people. The same thing happened in New Orleans after Katrina and in a hurricane in Haiti. We also know in Thailand in 2018, the Army's elite forces rescued a soccer team that was stuck in a cave. And over COVID, we saw how the Army was used a lot of times for a lot of peaceful purposes and to try and help out in many, many different ways. And so these are all just some more of the things. Now let's get to, so again, that really harkens to the prophecy of Isaiah. They will turn their swords into plowshares, where again, not only is war being reduced, but actually war things are being used for good things. Not only that, we know a lot of advances like airplanes come from the military. All right, how about violence? We all get a feeling that violence is rising. Maybe 2020 would be an exception, but over the general trajectory, violence has been steadily declining. Here are homicide rates across Western Europe per 100,000 people. It used to be there would be 24 homicides per 100,000 people, and now it's down to 0.6. Let's go back even to the 1990s. How about just violent crimes? Again, I said our world is better than even the 1990s, 30 years ago. Currently, many Americans are convinced crime is rising in the US, but they are wrong. This is 538. Oh, there's no statistic over there? Okay, let's show you over here then. Here is the lowering violent crime rate. Here it is. Violent crime rate per 1,000 people or property crime per 1,000 people. It's been steadily going down. So in the last years, it's been going down. The Bureau of Justice Statistics found the rate of violent crimes per 1,000 Americans plummeted from 80 in 1993 to just 23 in 2018. The country is much safer, but somehow Americans don't get the idea. And let me read this most important line over here. The biggest challenge really, and we're seeing this as a society across the board right now, is that even though our organizations, our businesses, our government entities are becoming more data-driven, we as human beings are not, said Megan Hollis, a research scholar at Ronan Institute for Independent Scholarship. And so not only are we doing much better than 2,000 years ago, we're exponentially doing better. But as human beings, we're having trouble seeing that. And why is that? That's because we as human beings tend to see the negative, right? Here they have an example. Oh, did they not put it on the screen? Oh, yeah. What do you notice over here on the screen? Anybody? Yeah, I know.
The missing tile that everybody wants us to admit.
Yep. But you notice it right away, right? We notice the missing tile. We always notice the little negative that's around. We always focus of what's sticking out of place. So in other words, we have this feeling that everything should be perfect, and whatever's out of place is what's wrong. And that's why the news says if it bleeds, it leads. You know, if they come into a home and everything's doing okay, there's nothing exciting about it. And In fact, in 2017, the New York Times began a weekly newsletter called This Week in Good News. And that newsletter only lasted until January 2019, and then they stopped it. And my guess is they obviously weren't getting enough people to read it. This Week in Good News. And this is something that the Rebbe used to say. The Rebbe used to say that we have to open up our eyes. He said this about the Mashiach. Somebody says we have to open up our eyes. And that's really the point of the lesson today. My main goal today was not to demonstrate to you the world is a better place than it was before, because I think we all knew that to an extent it's somewhat better than it was before. But just how much better it is, we don't even realize in all these different areas, and particularly in the areas of the prophecies of the prophets, in poverty and famine, longevity, and crime, and war, and beating swords into plowshares. All the prophecies, we've been having a taste of it. And we've been having a taste of it in a massive, massive way. But people are not realizing it. And that's the problem where we're at, is that when we talk about the Mashiach and it sounds so fantastical, it's not as far off as we imagine. It really has to do with our attitudes as human beings and our attitudes as people and where we are holding. And I'm going to end off with a story that will really bring this home and will hopefully bring the lesson in your lives to life. And that story is about 120 years ago. There was a city called Kharkov in Ukraine, near the Russian border. And there were two Hasidim, two Hasidic Jews who went to their Rebbe. They were coming from the city of Kharkov. And so first one gentleman went in, we'll call him person A. He goes into a private audience with the grand rabbi, his Rebbe. And his Rebbe says, how is Kharkov doing? And he says, Kharkov, I have to tell you, it's a horrible place. It's the community's fighting. Nobody's getting along. The schools are broke. People are angry. The synagogues are empty. Nothing's working out. The Rebbe says, oh, so terrible. All right, what can we do? He walks out. Then the next guy walks in and he asks, new house Kharkov, and the guy says, oh my gosh, you can't believe it. The community is thriving. Everybody's getting along. The schools are doing okay. All right, they can use a little more money. People are happy. All right, there's a couple fights, but people are happy. The synagogues are full. We could use a couple more people, but the things are doing good. And the Rebbe gives them a bunch of blessings and a bunch of things. And he walks out, and these two Hasidim meet, and they ask what happened. And he says, how come you got all the blessings I didn't? And he runs back into the Rebbe, and he says, how come, this guy's a liar. To him, you give all the blessings. I tell the truth, and that's all I get. No blessings for me. And so the Rebbe looks at him and says, listen, you believe I'm a holy man, right? He says, yes. He says, I know good and well what's happening in Kharkov. But I wanted to see which Kharkov do you live in? I want to see which Kharkov are you living in? And obviously, you're living in the negative Kharkov. And so that's the idea. You could have two people living in the same place, but it depends how they look at it. You could have two people living in Palm Harbor, and one could talk about the Jewish community. Look at what's happening. Or, there's two ways of looking at everything. It's how we look at it and how we perceive it. It could be the same exact place, but what place are you living in? And so we live in this world. Are there negative things we can focus on? 100%. But which world do we want to live in? And you know what, as I said earlier, if we focus on the fact that we are living in a better world, and a world that's becoming exponentially better, that will give us the impetus to bring the Mashiach even closer and may he come speedily in our days. So to recap what we discussed today, we discussed briefly that the belief in the Messiah is a central tenet of Judaism. And we discussed how the redemption will not be sudden, as most people think, but we are steadily approaching it. We brought different prophecies that the prophets bring, and we showed how we are speeding at the speed of light towards many of these wonderful things. And really, it's up to us, as the Rebbe said many times, to open up our eyes and to see what world we are living in. Are we living in this much greater world? Are we going to focus on the positive, or are we going to focus on the negative? That is up to you. And thank you all for coming. And anybody has any questions?